we're a quite finely tuned machine that if I can increase your basal metabolic rate, as in the calories you burn just doing nothing, by something as little as 100 calories, then over a year that could look like 7 kilograms of weight loss, a stone, 14 pounds. Wild. So because we have this really, tightly managed sort of machine. So the addition of some lean tissue is an absolutely fundamental part of weight management, which saw weight training rise to the front in terms of a better way to control body composition. But it's not necessarily the act of the weight training, it's the tissue that it lays down. And that can work two ways. I can build more muscle tissue, or as I age, I can stabilize and retain the tissue I've got.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today is a physiologist and leading expert in lifestyle management. He speaks widely on the application of well-being strategies and consults to businesses and individuals around the world. He was the head of physiology at Nuffield Hospitals, where he led the largest team of applied physiologists, well-being advisors and nutritionists in the UK. In 2009, he co-founded Viavi on London's Harley Street to deliver the world's most advanced health assessment and health evaluation service. He now runs a corporate well-being consultancy service and has founded an industry-specific education platform to drive practical coaching skills in the broader undervalued areas of lifestyle, particularly stress, sleep, toxicity and mindset. Today, we discuss the 4 key areas required for longevity and the opportunities the fitness industry needs to grasp to be able to impact the lifestyle of its customers. So please welcome the co-founder of Future Practice, Mr. Oliver Patrick.
Oliver Patrick, thanks for joining me in Peterborough.
Absolute joy, the home of Escape Fitness.
Yes, the center of the universe.
I literally have never been here, so it's a thrill to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
really
thanks
good.
for coming along. So first question I thought would be interesting, certainly for me, is what is a physiologist? Because I believe that is how you kind of define yourself. Is that correct?
It's a great question. It's the ultimate question because no one knows. And actually, there are proper physiologists and there's other physiologists. So I'm going to caveat that.
What are you? Which one are you?
I'm somewhere in between in the fact that I actually did exercise physiology as a degree and left that degree, as most people do, out of sort of the sports science or physiology arena with no skills whatsoever. So I had lots of intelligent thinking or what I thought was intelligent thinking, but no vocational skills whatsoever. So I left there, thought, what am I going to do? And then naturally had to retrain to understand even fitness prescription. So I didn't know sets and reps, I didn't know periodization. So I understood the complexities of cellular energy production, but I didn't know how on earth to guide anyone to do anything. So did the sort of a classic diploma in exercise prescription, picked up a job that was titled sports physiologist, and did that through really almost interning my way into the position. So did some volunteer work, then progressed up to running stress electrocardiograms which you'd think was a highly technical skill.
It sounds yeah.
And it is, but back in this is probably the turn of the 2000s, it was poorly regulated, and with very limited training, I became part of a sort of medical team running at the time the classic annual health MOT. So they called me a sports physiologist. I didn't call myself. And then I looked at it, and of course there are then clinical physiologists who work in hospitals. You've got respiratory physiologists, cardiac physiologists with definitive additional qualifications. And their job is to sort of take people who've had heart attacks or respiratory problems and rehabilitate them. And I was in this weird role where I certainly wasn't giving people sports advice, but I was running some form of diagnostic testing, then trying to help people curate their lifestyle. And to cut a long story short, it was a pretty poor product at the time. It went through some significant evolution, but I realized that the way I was giving advice was very disparate from even others in the team. And as we started to grow with developing that health assessment product, we were having communications about stress, communications about posture, communications about nutrition above and beyond calorie intake and fat mass. But we were, again, doing it in a disparate fashion. So as that organization grew and we built, I was sort of retrofitting some training that said, okay, well, the way I communicate about stress should be the same as you. The way we take that test should be the same as each other, and protocolizing what was a pretty organic process. And as that sort of product grew, we were acquired by Nuffield, who wanted to have a sort of slightly more energized health assessment offering. And we turned that training into a level 7 diploma in health and wellbeing physiology. So I call myself a physiologist because I sort of wrote the qualification in that middle space that isn't hospital-based rehabilitation work, but is the collection of data pertaining to how a person works, and then using that data to drive out a slightly improved lifestyle prescription and coaching if possible.
And was that when you was at Viavi group? Was that?
Good question. So Viavi was the evolution of Nuffield. So Nuffield was how do we create large corporate health screening opportunities, and that was a big Nuffield. When you might remember from back in the day, was a big orthopedic hospital group. Wasn't particularly dynamic, but it effectively wanted to go into the sort of the big banks, the big law firms, and deliver their annual screen, which back in the day was a sort of expected perk. It wasn't necessarily a good product, but if you're moving from law firm A to law firm B, you'd be looking at the benefits package. You'd be like, where's my health screen? Where's my gym membership? Where's my annual ski trip? So it was a sort of expected senior level perk. What we did by bringing in technologies that started to look at things like stress, so we brought in heart rate variability, we brought in antioxidant measurements to start looking at quantifying diet quality above and beyond weight as a single marker of that. We brought in some kind of postural mapping using a triaxial accelerometer to measure spinal segment quality, movement, inflection, to open up debates that we couldn't have previously, which is, do we think you're close to burnout? Do we think your diet quality is good? Do we think you move like a bag of old bones or like a sort of elite level ballerina? And off the back of that, give better lifestyle advice. In creating a slightly more energized product, Nuffield could sell not just that senior level at a perk, but more at the HR level as a meaningful, impactful benefit across the business. Viavi Group was born out of myself and the medical director and the CEO left, because by that point we were doing huge numbers of health screens, 55,000, within the hospital group or similar annually, then maybe 155,000 pre-gym MOTs because we bought the Cannons group and started to clinicalize the gym. Viavi was, what would you do if you only had to look after that one person and you had unlimited resource? So if I had to look after you and I didn't have to have someone else delivering a similar product in Peterborough or Manchester, what would you do if you weren't restricted by scale or financial restriction? So Viavi started with that premise. It was actually a project we ran within Nuffield for a client to sort of deliver the ultimate health assessment and say, okay, if I've got unlimited resource, what can I achieve with an individual on a longitudinal basis? So not a transactional health assessment. I see you for 3 hours, then I cast you into the night, but let me be your partner in health over a 12-month period using unlimited diagnostics, prognostics, functional medicine as required, curated against the needs of the individual. And fundamentally, how can we peek beneath the bonnet, leveraging the latest science? And that product, because it was a high cost point, led me to being on Harley Street for 12 years. I'm no longer in that group, delivering the world's most advanced health assessment to high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. But clinically fascinating, because here you go, right, I can run any test that we choose. The clinical team can choose to run your full genome or not. We can run every marker of hormones. We can run the full gut microbiome. We can run your blood labs and look for not just the traditional markers, but novel markers of inflammation or early markers of tumor cells developing in different parts of the body. And technology has moved far faster than application. And
I was going to ask that, like how driven are you about research in terms of, this is a thing that wasn't a thing before, and then technology, now we can track this way easier and way cheaper than before? What kind of came first? Did it come first, the idea of, look, this would be great, these are the things that we want to figure out, or did some of the technological capabilities drive how you shaped that sort of ultimate MOT?
It's a great question. I think you start with the blind spot. So you say, look, one of the great challenges I have is you can leave a good health assessment, and be told you are well and have a heart attack in the car park. You can leave a pretty good, 800, 900 pound health assessment and have a brain tumor of significant size. You can have a pancreatic cancer. You can have Alzheimer's. You can have a range of clinical things that have been missed. So you start with, how do I increase the sensitivity of the product? So clearly there's 155,000 diseases and counting. So there's lots of different ways. Not all of those are fatal. Don't want this to be a disastrous experience for any listener. Yeah, stay calm. But fundamentally, you can't exclude all of them. But you go to the big ones, you say, look, a third of people will die of cardiovascular disease. So how do we get a 360 view on three key things? Whether there's something wrong with that biological system now, and that's your screening piece. And for most people, there's not. That's the reassuring piece. But if you think of the traditional heart attack I was looking for with that stress ECG back in the early 2000s, for you to get an abnormal stress ECG or EKG in America, where you've got the leads on your chest and you're cycling up a hill, your coronary arteries need to be somewhere 85 or 90% blocked. So it's not exactly a preventative test. If you define prevention as finding the disease just before it kills you, it's preventative. But I think what's interesting is, wouldn't it be better to find an artery at 40% blocked and then steer that person through pharmacological intervention or lifestyle or other, so they never move to 50%? So from a screening point of view, you've got a blind spot that an ECG plus someone listening to your heart doesn't tell you if your heart's healthy. Then you can go into the coronary angiogram and the CT, scan, and you can do the, an arterial stiffness, you can do an echocardiogram. You start to build this sort of, array of tests that still doesn't quite give you a 360-degree view, but it gives you 340 degrees to say that system or that organ, to the best of science's ability, is robust. Then you're saying, okay, it's nothing wrong with it now, but here I sit at 45, believe it or not, and my cardiovascular system is showing, pathological changes that looks more like a 55-year-old. So then you're into what you'd call that sort of pathophysiological prevention, which is, let's stop looking for disease at the 11th hour, 59th minute. Let's look for deteriorating physiology above and beyond the expected chronological level of deterioration. So if my innards look like a 60-year-old's, God help me, but what am I doing then that's aggregating that damage? So you're looking then for markers that suggest that you've increased the volume of cellular damage above and beyond what would be expected. And then your third area is, what is the functional manifestation of that biological system? So you'll probably be familiar with VO2 max as a good marker of aerobic capacity. That's probably also the best single biological marker of aging. But that VO2 max would also correlate with how much mitochondria I've got in the cells of my body, the physical batteries. So that low VO2 max will have an enormous impact on my energy levels, my clarity of thought, my strategic thinking, brain fog, my immune capability. That is fundamentally how well I work at consuming and consuming the fuel that turns into energy. So when you're looking at someone in those levels, you're sort of taking a biological system and saying, where are my blind spots from a screening point of view, from a prevention point of view, and from a functional expression point of view, and you're trying to add data to that, and then match that data to the subjective, what the person's feeling in front of you, and then make changes strategically off the back of that, which was great fun, great fun, and a great product, great team, and what's great about that is you saw longitudinally, you had someone in front of you, you made that change, and then you're measuring that change. So there's been no one more accountable, because you're looking after high net worth people in the first place, so pressure's on. They're used to good service standards, they're used to getting what they want. You've got this data-led approach to a strategic change in their lifestyle, but that change is then entirely measurable, and you are therefore accountable. So what you've got over that toolkit of 12 years is a great understanding of which tests add value, which tests don't, but which changes add value and which changes don't. So, I started, Viavi as a huge advocate of the impact of lifestyle. I left Viavi as passionate a believer in the impact of lifestyle as you're going to find out there, because that product, by the time I left, and has moved on since, was a £15,000 health assessment, and you could argue, plus minus some genetic inflection, you're measuring £15,000 of the ripples of lifestyle. You start me with your lifestyle on a piece of paper, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure all the different ways the things you're doing well express, and the things that you're absent or missing are expressing negatively. And that became absolutely fascinating to me, that lifestyle wasn't this thing that sat separately to medicine and elite diagnostics. Lifestyle is the lifeblood of how we work. And really, when we tweak, adjust, strategize lifestyle, we saw improvements in every parameter we're measuring. And that's hugely empowering.
Introducing the next big thing in functional training, the Escape Barrow, a revolutionary training tool that combines a loaded farmer's carry with a sled push to develop hip, grip, and core strength. Developed in partnership with Pete Holman, inventor of the TRX Rip Trainer and Nautilus Glute Drive, the Escape Barrow can be rolled, pushed, dragged and carried. The Escape Barrow packs a punch with an impressive load capacity of 440 pounds, and with a 2-stage galvanized paint covering process, it's also ideal for outdoor use. So head over to escapefitness.com/barrow. That's escapefitness.com/barrow to find out more. Enjoy the rest of this episode.
So when you were at Viavi, you did that for 12 years, did you?
12 years.
And so what would you say then? You said it kind of got you to rethink things, which I guess it would, because you're really on the cutting edge. You've got, how many patients do you have through that period?
I can't disclose,
okay.
but
Probably a lot of people, a lot of data you had.
I would have seen hundreds of high net worths, and many of those people over that period of time. You see them for 7, 8, 9, some of them 12 years. So you're watching, an unbelievable data dump over a 12-year period. You're factoring age-related expected depreciation in that data, and you're fighting that because there is great resilience we can show to aging. But it's an unbelievable sort of volume of data to start shaping that. When I talk about things now, I'm talking about them with a relatively unique perspective. That I've measured the things people talk about subjectively, objectively. And when I'm talking about improving someone's movement levels, I'm not here with any interest in calories. I'm interested in gut motility. I'm interested in mitochondrial density. I'm interested in stability of blood glucose and better HbA1c markers of continuous glucose monitoring, etc. Because I've seen the ripples of actions people diminish to a sort of simplified reason why, expressing through complex biology, and that again it was a great learning that I'm grateful for.
With talking on a very, very base level for people at all different levels to be able to understand what it meant, I guess from when you went in and when you came out, what would be some things that the average person on the street would relate to? So when you went in, what were your thoughts about this space that you were going into? Obviously you were looking at trying to understand where people are from a kind of an inclusive health perspective and everything that encompasses.
Yes.
And then when you sort of came out, like, were there any major shifts in your sort of belief system in some ways? And what were some of those, if there were, what were some of those very simple changes that people can relate to? So was it diet? Was it fitness? Was it mobility? How would you see, how would you best explain that?
It's a great question. As you might expect. I think, it's very hard to find disease. Even with the best kit in the world, we have a changing physiology. The big bones, in terms of the big cancers where the screening tests are quite sensitive and specific, they can work well. And the logical screening people have heard about, they should be doing. Testicular exams, breast exams, not always the same person for those two. But bowel screening, looking at prostate screening. The big sort of traditionally recognized screening tests have significant value and should be part of everyone's program. So that's given. It's hard to chase disease down the line. That's a reality, and I think it requires intense sort of it's quite labor sensitive that you've got to keep looking for that disease on a more frequent basis than I had imagined. If I find you disease free today, I may not have that same status quo in 3 months' time. And that's difficult to rationalize. But with some diseases, not all, not heart disease, not certain forms of cancer, but it's sort of a rolling problem.
And is that because some diseases are kind of slow and long that kind of evolve, and there's something can happen, like I know you talk a lot about stress, you could have this interaction that just blows everything out of the water?
Totally. Yeah, totally. Okay. So there can be exponential changes in relatively small periods of time, and what you can't do is hold someone captive to a 3-monthly screening process. So that is difficult. You can't control our mortality as much as we would love to. That was a challenge. But you can influence the way we work much more than I thought we could. And where were probably the 3 biggest things that let me say 4 things that I saw when we changed them. We saw everything change. And the first one will be a simple one: sedentary to active. Not taking your VO2 max from 55 milliliters per kilogram to 65, not elite level changes, but taking someone from sedentary to active. So someone who doesn't do steps to doing steps, someone who's in a wheelchair to being more active in that wheelchair, is absolutely unbelievable through almost every biological system. Wild. wild, and so you're there and you're going, okay, we've got improved hormones here, and we've got improved gut function here, and we've got improved glucose and metabolic stability here, we've got improved blood lipid markers. And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. And the opportunity to take someone from zero, to and increasing by 10%, the ripple that has into physiology is far greater than taking someone from 80 to 90%.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I love that message to the sort of the masses, in the fact that if you're not doing much, the opportunity for you is huge. If we assume you and I are significant athletes, and one of us is true, the other one not so true, then the gains are marginal, for those changes. But that sedentary population have the most to gain. So sedentary to active, unbelievable. The value of muscle mass, also significantly underappraised. You'll be pleased about this, of course. But when we have an improvement in muscle mass, of course, we see a change in bone densitometry. That's classic. We see better glucose control, because much of the sugar in our blood is stored as muscle glycogen. So we have a greater pot of where to store the sugar. We see improved markers of androgen hormones, testosterone and sexual hormones. We see the benefit of functional strength, which turns into more activity levels. So it becomes a sort of cyclical thing. So when we put muscle mass on people, again, you're seeing changes in blood, you're seeing changes in gut, you're seeing changes in neurotransmitters. It's an unbelievably impressive tissue that we lose muscle as we age, or as that sort of counter says, do we age because we lose muscle? The sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, 3 to 5% of my muscle mass will try and drop off a cliff from 40 onwards, and mine's going even harder than that. So we have this thing that the retention of muscle mass is an absolutely fundamental strategy to attenuate aging.
Is there I had this chat with Dr. Gabrielle Leon, is like, how much muscle do you actually need? And like, she was saying, well, this is an unanswered question. A lot of people are thinking about it. Are you sort of any closer to understanding what that is, or is that still?
No, and I suppose you would say at what level the markers of inadequate muscle start to rise. So, and that will have a sort of variability between individuals. If you're going broad brush, you'd say men should be less than 20%, women less than 30%. I find it really interesting that when I look at body composition reference ranges, it says that my body fat should be 21% or less, but as I get to 50, it can be 22%, and when I get to 55, it's 23%. Fat as a tissue is an inflammatory tissue. If it's intra-abdominal or visceral fat, it will potentially infiltrate my liver and turn me into foie gras, which is the fatty liver disease. And we see lots of people carrying just a little bit of extra weight, but that weight being intra-abdominal with abnormal liver ultrasounds and slightly rising liver enzymes. But that fat is a problem, right? And because I'm older doesn't mean it's less of a problem. It's the opposite. It's more of a problem. But reference ranges, are based on averages, not ideals. So, what you've got is this funny thing that says, oh, as you get older, you should lose muscle mass. Well, you should, unless you weight train. And we lose muscle mass because our body's trying to, to reduce the sort of metabolic load of having this quite expensive tissue. A kilogram of muscle burning me 70 odd calories a day, just lying in bed, because it drives my basal metabolic rate because it's vibrating all the time. So it's an expensive tissue. My body
it's vibrating all the time.
So muscle is a wonderful tissue. It's active tissue. So it has muscle tremor, and in the fact that it sort of has a continual tone in it. So the tone in muscle means it's fundamentally active all the time. It burns calories when I'm doing nothing, and that's really why we saw weight training rise up as a significant tool in management of weight and body composition. Because if I go to the gym and I burn 280 calories, lifting some weights, or 280 calories running on a treadmill, theoretically they'll both have a similar effect on my weight management. But if in the 280 calories of weight training I put on some extra muscle tissue, then I burn another 12 calories every day. So muscle has the ability to influence my basal metabolic rate, not just my daily energetic expenditure. And we're a quite finely tuned machine that if I can increase your basal metabolic rate, as in the calories you burn just doing nothing, by something as little as 100 calories, then over a year that could look like 7 kilograms of weight loss, a stone, 14 pounds. Wild. So because we have this really, tightly managed sort of, machine. So the addition of some lean tissue is an absolutely fundamental part of weight management, which saw, weight training rise to the front in terms of a better way to control body composition. But it's not necessarily the act of the weight training, it's the tissue that it lays down. And that can work two ways. I can build more muscle tissue, or as I age, I can stabilize and retain the tissue I've got. So come back to the question. The second thing was if I stick a kilogram of muscle mass on you, I'll see changes all over the place. Third bit would have been probably, improving the functionality of the gut. The gut is, is trendy and sexy and everyone loves it. And we would look at, gut from multiple different angles. And gut can mean anything in terms of the whole digestive process, but normally the large intestine. And within the large intestine, people are normally talking about the fact that your large intestine should be full of these beneficial bacteria that work with your body sort of symbiotically to break down some of the fibers that you consume. And in the digestion of those fibers, they manufacture these commodities that our immune system runs on. They help manufacture things like serotonin to influence my brain, hence the gut-brain axis. We hear that phrase quite often. So when we looked at the gut, we would look at whether there's a problem there from an inflammation point of view. We'd look whether it worked in terms of did it produce the right enzymes to break your food down, blah, blah, blah. We would look whether there's some weird infection that you picked up, some traveler's diarrhea, and God knows there's a parasite sitting in there causing chaos. But the key bit was, what's that bacterial balance look like? And bacterial balance is difficult to sustain because bacteria feeds on fiber, and most people eat a fiber-less diet. So in the US, they have the honor of 60% of their diet being highly processed, hyperpalatable food that's got very little fiber. UK, we're trying to catch you up with 50% of our diet. So there's not much fiber in there for those bacteria to feed on. Plus, I probably have taken an antibiotic at some point, so I haven't fed them and I've killed them. And so we saw lots and lots of people with inadequate either diversity, as in different types of bacteria, or abundance, as in the volume of bacteria. And they're fundamental to how I work. So in those situations, you would be looking at, addition of fermented foods, and we've seen the rise of kimchi and kefir and kombucha. They mostly start with K. Sauerkraut, the poor cousin, miso, these things that have live bacteria in them. And the logic for that is that, inadequate fiber, other challenges, stress is a big thing, which we'll come to, but, inadequate fiber in our diet, plus potential use of antibiotics.
Does that apply to all kinds of medication as well? Like, does any kind of chemicals that you're putting inside for different reasons, does that also potentially disrupt your gut?
Less so, and on that I'd have to defer, in terms of specific medications and the role they have. I think with PPIs, which are sort of omeprazole, the acid blocking medications, and we see acid reflux as a major issue. To my knowledge, they have a disrupting effect. Other medications I wouldn't be sure, but the antibiotic is going to be the biggest one because its job is to kill bacteria. And it's sort of a nuclear bomb to solve a domestic crisis. It's like, I've got a bacterial infection on my skin. Let's whack in, a system-wide, antibiotic solution, and that is a challenge. And again, this is not castigating medicine, but we've got lots of people at the moment with chest infections, which is viral. It's sticking around. Doctors will say, look, it's been there 3 weeks. Let's give you an antibiotic. It's like, okay, that's maybe not the right choice because antibiotics don't work on viruses. It's an antibiotic. It's trying to kill bacteria. So we had, when we improved gut function again, we saw, and logically, because the bacteria are then there working, doing their job, but also that will improve your absorption and assimilation of the nutrients within food. So are you seeing the gut working better directly, or are you seeing the indirect effect of better nourishment? Either way, it's there in the bloods, it's there in the mood stability, it's there in the markers of energy production. So gut would always be another centralized area for improvement. And that would often be about, improving hydration, improving diversity of diet. So trying to create 30 different types of foods. So that diversity, which has different colors, different fibers, which feed different families and colonies of bacteria, and getting people to engage their digestive process, which is, digestion is sort of neurologically the opposite to stress. So, and I'll bring this to my fourth key point. In fact, if I'm physiologically primed for stress, then we often mistakenly call that fight and flight, and I'll say why mistakenly in a minute. But the opposite nervous system to that is if there's one system that speeds my biology up, my sympathetic nervous system engages me for energetic processes, for dynamic activity, moves blood out of my stomach, reduces digestive secretions. It physically recognizes that as a machine, I can't be all things to all needs. So it biologically prepares me for this. And I've got another nervous system, parasympathetic, that slows me down, and we call that the rest and digest nervous system. And that's the reason why you can't eat a heavy meal and do high explosive exercise. It's the reason my brother fainted in the swimming pool doing his silver swimming badge when I was 12. It's one of the greatest moments of my life because he'd eaten too close to swimming, and his biology was confused between digestion and swimming, and fundamentally that created a crash in his blood pressure. Again, he survived, but it was great. He's my older brother, so delighted to see him struggling. Hope he doesn't listen to this. I hope he does listen to it. So within that, we have the fourth area, which is the power of recovery.
Just going back to that gut one, do you have you seen any connection with? You mentioned mood as well. Like, have you seen any connection with what's going on in the gut, whether it's proactively or reactively, in terms of how your mind, your mental health is? Like, is there a connection between those two?
There's a strong sense there's a connection. The challenge is always causation. So if someone's got poor, low mood state, and they've got, an imbalanced gut, whatever that might mean, what you can't do is go, that's your low mood state is because the factors affecting any, symptomatic expression are so multifactorial. So, is that because they've got a poor gene that means they just don't make much serotonin? Is it because they've got a terrible relationship with their spouse? Is it because they had a trauma when they're young? In all those situations, I think one of the great challenges in physiology is people look for sort of single point causes, and it's rarely that. So undoubtedly there is a correlation between the way our gut works and the effectiveness of how the brain works that is increasingly being linked to mood stability. So what you've got is in that situation, if you find someone whose mood state is not where they want it to be, that might be expressing as anxiety, it might be expressing as early signs of preclinical depression or even a clinical depression, and you find their gut isn't working very well, you can take this sort of logical approach to go, look, we know that if we get this firing, it will have a likely improved benefit. So let's do that. Let's not say that's the reason, and let's not hang our hat on that. But it's absolutely logical that you.
It's a good place to start.
It's a great place to start, and it's it's controllable. And whether it improves their mood stability or not, we have to look at that challenge of mood stability. It should improve their energy. I think in all those years of doing health assessments, health screening, the idea that people are motivated by preventing disease is a bit of a fallacy. It's too intangible. It's too distant. It won't. I didn't get up this morning early, but I won't get up early tomorrow and go for a run, so I don't get a heart attack in 30 years' time. It's amorphous and doesn't mean anything. I will get up and go for a run because without it, I'll have less energy, and I want that energy to be a great, husband, father. I want that available energy. So that's the reason I'm going to do it. In the same way, if my gut isn't working well, can I manufacture as much cellular energy as if it is? And so often when we look at mood state, we see challenges of energy. In fact, one of the major diagnostic criteria of depression is inability, low energy. And again, if you and I, stay up all night tonight and then have a busy day tomorrow, stay up all night the following night, you're going to ask me if I'm in a good mood on that third day. I'm going to feel terrible. I won't have strategic thinking. I will make poor food choices. I will be lured towards carbohydrate-rich foods. I will be lured towards arguments because I'm trying to generate false forms of energy to keep me going. So I find it fascinating the rise in depression diagnoses being dealt with separately from a general population-wide energy problem. And energy is the sum of our it's the sum of our biological functioning, but it's also the sum of our emotional relationships, our mental state, and our purposefulness. So we talk about the four energies model, which is as I sit here now, my energy will come from various things in terms of my biological contribution, but also whether I've got good emotional relationships, also whether I'm learning, growing, developing, and also whether I think I have some kind of purpose or contribution or I'm being affirmed for those things. But to go straight to a sort of Prozac, a citalopram, an SSRI medication without saying, can we enable more energy first, seems wild. Now, that's labor intensive, requires a two-way process, and in the same way as I can go to a doctor with a high blood pressure, they give me a pill to put it down. I think what was really interesting with that experience again is how often we saw traditional medicine medicating the symptom of centralized dysfunction. We had an individual who had high blood pressure, saw a cardiologist, get you on an antihypertensive. They had early diabetes, see an endocrinologist, get on metformin. They saw a psychiatrist for early depression, get on an antidepressant. Sports physician for inflamed knee, get on arcoxia to manage that. They had the classic stomach acidity and reflux, the sort of acid coming up the neck.
Could some of that have been because of a combination of drugs that they've had to put in as well?
So then that's absolutely valid. So that could be the interactions of the drugs, that they're becoming a sort of mini, pharmaceutical cupboard. In that situation, no, because the interactions weren't problematic. But they've seen 5 different consultants, 5 different medications, and no one's looked at where that's all coming from. And when we look at what I would call the 4th area, which is inadequate recovery, if we find someone who's physiologically exhausted or has got inadequate biological energy recovery, then how does that express? Here we almost have to go one step back and say, what on earth am I talking about with recovery? But really, if we think of the human a bit like a battery, you and I, as we sit here now, we are facing a tug of war internally with, depending on what I think and what I see and what I feel, I either accelerate my biological processes driven by the sympathetic nervous system, or I decelerate my biological processes driven by the parasympathetic. And if we reduce that even, inaccurately, but usefully probably, we're saying, I've got an accelerator pedal and a brake pedal, or I've got energy out and energy in. And when we first sort of unlocked heart rate variability, and I say we, not me, but when people in the 70s unlocked heart rate variability, what we've got with HRV, a la Whoop, a la Aura, a la other devices, is a quantification of autonomic nervous system activity. Simplified further, how much time am I spending with my body in an energetic out state and an energetic recuperating state? And when I first started measuring stress, I'm doing that inverted brackets, measuring stress, you can't quite measure it completely. I thought I'd find particularly those senior executives were super stressed, because they had these high octane jobs, busy lives. And when we looked at heart rate variability, plus cortisol testing, plus neurotransmitters, plus other things, but HRV is the core of that, we found that they weren't excessively stressed, they were inadequately recovered. In layman's terms, again, I'll say layman's, they had inadequate parasympathetic activity over 24-hour cycles. And that was systemic, not just one day, that was 2 days, that was 3 weeks, that was 4 weeks. Now, parasympathetic slows down my blood pressure. Parasympathetic reduces my stomach acidity. Parasympathetic would control my blood glucose. Parasympathetic would turn off my inflammatory processes. Parasympathetic would energize me. If I'm being, again, simplistic and cancelable by being overly simplistic, didn't we see with that individual 5 medications, each treating the symptom of inadequate parasympathetic activation? And we did. So what we do in those situations, say, right, then let's engage more parasympathetic tone. First thing first, move from sedentary to active. That will increase parasympathetic tone. We've seen the proliferation of meditation and headspace and calm, billion-dollar companies born out of slowing, breathing, visualizing, things that's put me out of sympathetic drive into parasympathetic. Wim Hof has spiritualized cold water therapy plus breathing, both great markers of improving parasympathetic tone. When we improve parasympathetic, we give the body the opportunity to recover energy. And in that, we get less symptoms of inadequate energetic availability. And that 4th area was that. It was that, most of these people are running an inadequate sort of, current account on their energy balance. Not calorie energy balance, but, how often is my physiology primed and ready for something that expends, and how often is it primed and ready to recoup? And if we found that and we improved it, then I talk about the rippling effect of the other parameters. That was wild.
Really?
To the point where you got people off chronic medications they've been on for years, stubborn weight coming down, better, emotional energy, better cognitive energy. It's difficult to have good relationships and think clearly when you're tired.
Yeah. I know. I'm conscious of how I react. I've just come over, as I said, I've just been in New York, arrived here, very tired, jet lagged, and you can see how you deal with certain situations. And then on top of that, a tough schedule and trying to do everything, you notice a difference in decision making. Yes. and how long a fuse you have or don't have with simple situations. Then you get a lot of complexity in, and it's like it's too much.
It's too much, and you're doing remarkably well, because I would be furious when I'm tired. And that's of course, anger produces adrenaline, which gives you energy.
Well, yeah, that's the other interesting thing. Yeah, it does. It's almost like, well, you've got to kind of, if you amp yourself up, you can just charge through. But then, going slightly off, but I suppose if you are a business leader, executive, or whatever, in that type of realm, then obviously you're probably there to be listening, making good decisions. That's your primary role, isn't it? You know, you're not necessarily a doer. You're meant to be making good decisions, and certainly from a decision making process, which is why I asked about the brain. Like you're severely compromised. So it makes me wonder. Well, how many really big business leaders, and you see some of the politicians that you look at people on TV when you're here and you're thinking, wow, okay, these people are traveling around the world, they're eating rubbish, you can tell by looking at them, they're not in great state.
Yes.
Under a lot of pressure to even what's going now at the moment, you've got wars, you've got this and that. How good is their decision making compared to what it could be? You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, are they on an 8 or a 9, which you'd hope someone that's in charge of our lives is, or are they on probably a 2 to 3? My guess at looking at these people is they're probably a 2 to 3. I don't know what you think.
Are you going to get me cancelled? You saw an opportunity. I think that I'm amazed. They're borrowing energy from somewhere, right? So if I am in a high energetic role, and I've got and my physiological energy production is substandard, then I can compensate, like I said, from having very clear cognitive stimulation. So when you take on a new role, when you learn something, you get that energy from that's real. When you fall in love, I remember when I first started dating my wife, in midweek we'd stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, not now, 15 years in, it's bedtime at 10. But that you access an energy that is above and beyond the raw physiology that we're operating in. When you find purpose, when you do
that's
something.
what that is. That's a purpose, is it, that you're
I think that you would normally distinguish them as different pieces. So let's imagine I finally found the subject of my dreams and I was learning about it. Bang, that revs me up. And then I suddenly fall in love, or I'd see real contribution to other humans. That's great. Purposefulness is, I found what I'm trying to do in this world.
And is that a temporary energy, or is that sustainable?
Difficult to quantify, but people can run on those things. There was a study years ago that said up to 70% of our energy is non-physiological. And I came into certainly the Viavi role thinking, if I sort of manipulate physiology to its perfect extreme, a la the sort of biohacker community, I'll get everyone there. And then you realize, look, if you have the perfect working body, but you have a misalignment of your values to the way you lead your life, you have poor emotional relationships, and you have no growth, you will not be well. And that challenged me, because I'm like, well, what am I measuring? And they're like, well, you can't measure those things. And we got biological systems that are in operation, like meridians and lots of things that people work on in traditional Chinese medicine or alternative medicine they're not robust anatomically, but there's something in them.
So are you saying, just to kind of translate it into my simple mind, are you saying then that if let's say you're in a job, a career, or relationship where you're totally aligned, you believe in it, you're in the right place, that you could be creating this sort of energy and passion for life, but if you're not in that job relationship thing, you're probably losing a lot of that? Is that
totally? They're all contributors. So you look if someone, and you start with the individual in front of you, if they got enough energy, don't create a problem that isn't there. So I think that one of the great challenges in health professionals is they judge people by their presence or absence of behaviors, not the expression of the behaviors. So someone will say, oh, you exercise 3 times a week, you must be fit. Well, we'll measure fitness to determine whether they're fit or not. 3 terrible gym sessions may not get you anywhere. Someone who says they eat a great diet might be malnourished because their gut doesn't work. Someone who sleeps 9 hours a night might not go into any deep sleep because they've got sleep apnea and they don't go into depth of recovery. So we've always judged, well-being by the absence or presence of behaviors, not the expression of those behaviors. Right. So I start with the individual. So if you're telling me your energy is suboptimal, then I've got 4 domains in which I can improve it. And those 4 domains, some of them are outside of my scope of practice. So I'm not necessarily going to go to purpose with you. You haven't asked me to do that. I'm not going to go to your emotional relationships. I'm not going to go to your mental growth. But then within the physiological domain, I can look at all the things that contribute to energetic production and see if I can enhance those. And I would start again with activity, right? So
could that be optimized? Like, could you say, well, look, you're pretty in a good state, but you want to sort of get an extra 10%, then, where are you with your purpose, your relationships? And
totally. So if you're saying that I want to be the best version of myself, and we're seeing, through your podcast, through others, people looking at that purpose piece, and people are learning and developing, there's a growth piece. So in many ways, 2 of those energetic processes could be fulfilled by podcasting to a degree. Emotional, people need to connect with other human beings. That was one of the great challenges of fatigue during COVID, that digital connection didn't replace the pure energetic capability of physical connection. And we all felt that when we first got back in a room, and you're like, what is it? But it's there. But again, within physiology, I've not met anyone that you can't find something that can improve. Right? So again, if I take aerobic fitness, the greater level of aerobic fitness, the more we'll find mitochondria within your cells. So you are running on batteries. That each of those energetic cells has got mitochondria in, and they produce energy that runs every biological process. If I take a difference between if I do a cell biopsy of me and my dad in his 80s, we'll find he's got less mitochondria. That's why he's less energized. His cognition is not as it was. It's not why, it's one factor within. So if I increase your aerobic fitness, I'll put more batteries in your cells. If I improve your hydration, I'll put more connection, electrical connection capability. If I put more nutrients, so when we look at mitochondrial function, for that to work, we need the prevalence of B vitamins and magnesium, which is why people take Baroccas and effervescent B vitamins, because they're associated with energy production. So inadequate B vitamins or magnesium would compromise my ability to manufacture energy on a cellular level. So I could take someone and say, look, is your mitochondria optimized? Is your nutrients involved in energetic production optimized? Do you optimize from a hydration point of view? But your biggest factor there will be, within that recovery space, are you spending inadequate time over each 24-hour cycle in parasympathetic tone? And or how does that ripple through sleep? So we know sleep is our biggest energetic restoration, and not just being asleep, but being into the stages and the quality of sleep. So,
and it's funny, I'm going to just jump in for there. It's funny because if I've been through, whether it's business, relationships, things over the years, no matter, and I've always, for most of my from a teenager, I've worked out and stayed relatively healthy. But when you're going through one of these sort of emotional situations, you don't sleep. You're then, and I guess that's probably stress, which we can probably come on to. But you're no matter what you do, you can't seem to figure out your recovery because you're up at night, like thinking and worrying about things.
Totally. And that's where stress is a cyclical thing, in the fact that if I have stress, broadly three things are happening with stress. There's an event, then there's my perception of that event, and then there's my physiology's reaction to that perception. And in the same way, that's why, when I used to get stressed about flying, they offered me a beta blocker. And I thought it was a really interesting thing back in the day, because they're saying you can fly if we cut off the chemical signal of stress, which is adrenaline. So we're going to put a drug that sits in the receptor and you can fly. And I was like, well, that hasn't changed the event, hasn't changed the fact I'm crapping myself because I think the plane's going to crash. But because my body isn't reacting to it, I can cope with it fine. And that empowered me in my role as a physiologist to take ownership over stress and say, look, is reducing someone's stress about changing their life, sugarcoating it, saying there is no Ukrainian war, saying there is no, cost of living crisis, that is the event. The biggest area of stress control is perception. You can have the person who sees all those things and realizes they can't do anything about it, and the person who sees all those things and takes them on board and starts stressing about them and inevitably catastrophizes them. So the problem today means a problem tomorrow, and that means a problem in 3 weeks' time, and I'm going to live my physiology in the state of 3 weeks' time. Cost of living crisis. Can I get through today? Yeah, I can, but I'm really worried I won't be able to go on that holiday. So I'm living the stress. I can't take my kids on holiday, or I can't feed them. What's the stress today? And that's where things like meditation
and I guess purpose again probably comes back in again, doesn't it?
Well, it will buffer the way you think. Purposefulness and sensing that you're there for a bigger task. But difficult to change that, right? Because the way I think is, for me, 45 years ingrained, built out of those previous experiences and learned practices. But I can change the way I react. So in that situation where I've got something that's bothering me, how do I make it bother me less? And that's where we talk about stress resilience, saying, well, the hormones I'm producing when I'm stressed are very similar to caffeine. So my caffeine management's got to be practical, be that pre-workout, be that coffee. I desperately need sleep because that's my trauma therapy. Sleep is where I will process things both from a filing point of view, but also re-enable, the energy to deal tomorrow with what challenged me today. Within that, alcohol is the greatest, misconception ever. In the fact that, if I've got a heightened level of stress or I'm in that sympathetic drive, I will have an upper respiratory breathing pattern. I will hold more tension through my muscles, and alcohol will take, that sort of muscle tension away, slow my breath, and make me feel relaxed while neurologically stimulating me.
Right.
So it's a false dawn, right? So it allows me also to go to sleep easier. You know, if I get hammered, which I do occasionally, you know, I fall asleep like a dream, but I wake up exhausted because the hours don't matter, because the depth
Oh,
is
this
shallow.
shows you what happens when you drink and you don't really sleep, do you?
You don't sleep. You're passed out. You know?
Yeah,
And again,
that's
and
right,
it's only in deep sleep that we really, you know, that we get certain
yeah, you
different
don't get
stages.
I find it's just like the middle line. It's just like, okay, you've rested, but you've not got deep or REM or hardly any until late at night.
And those, you know, so within REM, we're processing the world and working out what we need to remember, what we need to forget. So that's our organizational capability of the brain. In deep, you know, we're really, it's really driving our immune system, you know, within deep, you know, and particularly correlating with melatonin production. Melatonin, a really important antioxidant on its own, so protecting our cells from being damaged, also precursor to growth hormone. So here we have the person who's ripping themselves to pieces in a gym, creating muscle fiber tears, boozing themselves to sleep and getting no gains. It doesn't matter you've fallen asleep, it doesn't matter you sleep for 9 hours, you've disabled some of the intricacies of sleep, you know, of sleep architecture, and that's a problem.
And I'm just going back to that point because we're covering a lot, but the purpose thing, like almost does what you do get into, you've got a sort of physiologist, but a psychologist, because I suppose thinking through those things and the stress and you can't get out of it, you know, in some cases, and I'm using this because I've been there, you know, whether it's business or relationship, you almost think that is all there is, you know, and so you're stressing because you think you're losing something because you probably don't have a greater purpose or you can't find it. And then when it comes to the energy that you need that having a purpose gives you, you've lost that. You've lost your sleep. You're probably eating shit. You're probably not exercising because you're like, I can't fit that in anywhere else. And so you kind of, you know, some of these things, I suppose, in isolation, you could look at each one of those in isolation and they could be the undoing of someone. But together, you know, they could also be equally powerful. You know, it's
Totally. And I think that it's that multifactorial approach that says, I think, yeah, I'm not a psychologist. And one of the great things I learned in my time, but yeah, and that doesn't mean we can't talk about the way we think and try and improve it. Yeah. So the great thing I learned really about being in and around the medical profession is there is a gray space between where they pick up things and where we're talking about things a la the fitness profession. And that gray space in between is that sort of preclinical, where, you know, if I'm going to most medical professionals, there's a threshold before they get involved. But most people are not quite clinically dysfunctional, but they're preclinical. And they do need people who can curate their lifestyle a little bit more effectively, including mindset and the way we think.
And it's, I apologize for jumping in, but I don't want my head to go off in different places. But in some cases, and I know mental health has started to become a thing that people, particularly men, are more comfortable talking about. Before it was almost like, you know, you sissy, you know, what do you, you know, don't be so soft. Now I think we're recognizing it a little bit more, but I do still feel that if you say you're even going to talk to someone about, you know, what's going on in your head, it's very, you know, culturally it's not, doesn't seem to be the right thing. If I said I'm going to go and see someone because I want to get a six pack or I want to add an extra sort of 20 pounds to my bench press, you know, that would be, yeah, go on. But if I'm going to talk to someone because it's like, look, I'm struggling to find my purpose, you think, what is wrong with you? When you sort of realize how much of a part that plays in all of the other parts of your life, you're like, well, yeah, actually, that's just as important to going and seeing someone to do your bench press and telling you what kind of proteins and stuff like that to eat and telling you should go to sleep instead of, you know, grind, work.
Vital. Vital, you know, and, you know, physiological flossing, you know, our actions in movement, nutrition, sleep and recovery, but, you know, psychological flossing, you know, outlets to communicate with peers, professional support. I am absolutely for it. I think, you know, within my domain, I say, well, yeah, it's difficult for me to change the way you think, which affects the way you feel, but I can change the way you feel, which will affect the way you think.
Yeah.
So if I give you incredible sleep, incredible energetic, you know, access, you know, so we optimize your body's ability to manufacture energy. We have you in a fantastically supporting exercise regime. And, you know, bear in mind, I wear my version of your aura, the Whoop, because, you know, exercise is a stress. So I couldn't quite work out at what dosage I was overdosing, you know, and so lots of people are overdosing on exercise in a situation where they need to reduce the intensity or the type of exercise. But within, you know, let's imagine I physiologically enable you to access more energy. How then do you feel? You know, what does that mean in the way you think? We used to say, never make a big life decision when you're tired. So get the energy, then make the decision. And also going back to purpose. Purpose doesn't have to be about, am I going to go and save the rainforests? Am I going to change the landscape? It's contribution, visible contribution, and affirmation from that. So it's not about, am I ultimately, leading a life that puts me at the gates of St. Peter? It's about saying, can I see the fruits of my effort? So if I put a pound of effort in, do I see a stone of reward? And am I getting some feedback that benefits people? So that it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be the big piece.
No, I think like you're right. The thing that I was, what was going through my mind is what comes first, the mental or the physical. And I've done a bunch of sort of, I've been on a bunch of workshops that talk about the two in America. And one of the things they always used to do is before you would do anything like get up, move, jump about for a few minutes, that sort of stuff. And to kind of get you in a state where, okay, now you can turn your brain on.
Totally.
And I suppose it's like, well, even people that are depressed and what have you, going out and doing a walk and then kind of rethinking about your problems, or going out and doing a run depending on what you're able to do. I always, even as a kid, I have a bad day, I go in the gym and I come out and I was like, well, what's changed? Suddenly everything's great.
Yes. Well, you chemically changed, right?
Okay.
We've got to look in people often think as their psychology as being, a pure, almost a spirit, or it's my soul. Really, if I can solve a depression by, recycling more serotonin or titrating different levels of neurotransmitters, it's still chemistry. And the biggest impact on that chemistry were the actions that an individual takes. Now, some people are going to have to work much harder. Or, so I look at every result and saying it's really a combination. If I took a cholesterol result, it's some of that is because of my DNA. My parents gave me dodgy genes that recycles cholesterol, badly. Some of that's down to my lifestyle, some of it's down to my environment. And I don't know whether it's 80, 10, 10, or it's 10, 70, 10, So I don't know how much of any expression is genetic versus environmental versus lifestyle. But I know lifestyle will be a factor in it. So you're going to get some people with a depression that responds incredibly well to increased activity, to more stable blood glucose control, to improved gut functioning, to better sleep. You're going to get others who do all those same things and get a marginal improvement. That doesn't mean those things don't work. It's just a bit like when someone has an underactive thyroid, they have to work harder to control their weight. But the same things affect them in the same way. They just are doing it with ankle weights, running the 5K versus me with the latest pair of Nike runners. So it's one where, fundamentally, when we look at improving mental health, I like the psychophysiological model that says, fundamentally, if I improve the way your physiology works, I will see an expression into your psychology that will enable you to have more energy to take on the tasks and challenges that you're doing. Aside to that, come back to the male piece, there's the value of sharing is absolutely unequivocal, and the reason why in almost every mental health campaign it's talk to someone is because so many of our assumptions, are not true. In the same way as when I was on that plane, I wasn't having any anxiety, or I wasn't getting stressed because I was on a plane. I was getting anxious because I am sitting on that plane and my plane's crashing and everyone else's plane is about to take them on holiday. So I'm living in a catastrophized future, and it's not quite the same. But talking will break that sort of falsehood that's going on, that everyone is better than me, or everyone's not struggling and I'm the only one. So, speaking to peers, professional support, family is fundamentally still the big intervention in mental health strategy. But improving access to energy should be right there as number two. And I don't hear it. I don't see it.
With that, is there any research that you've seen that says when you're, like, let's say you're afraid of flying or afraid of spiders?
Yes.
Is there any?
Thank you very much. Let's just imagine my two.
If you're in your sort of the state, what you call like relax and digest.
Rest and digest.
Rest and digest.
Yes.
As opposed to you being in your fight or flight. Do they know if you're less scared of spiders and flying if you're in that, if you've kind of been active and everything in a slightly different state than if you're in the other state?
It's a good question. I'm not great in terms of research scientist. So
Right.
Is there a piece of evidence that compellingly links that? I don't know. I think you can look at the medical fraternity and say it's historically given beta blockers for people who've got a
And what
fear
do
of
they
public.
do then?
So they are a drug that normally given for cardiovascular health to drop blood pressure, but they sort of sit in the receptor that adrenaline would land in.
Okay.
So I might be neurologically activating my sympathetic nervous system, but its chemical messenger gets blocked.
Okay.
So I don't actually get that sort of that heightened adrenalized state that actually sends a feedback loop to my brain to go, I know you were starting to get worried about flying. Now you should really get worried about flying. Something's really going wrong. And then my breathing pattern goes up and I don't move and it can cycle into a panic attack. Okay. So beta blocker kills the chemical messenger of the sympathetic nervous system. And so I feel calm. And there's that old phrase, if the body is physiologically relaxed, it can't feel stressed. Equally, some people might take a sort of diazepam or tramadol, muscle relaxant, either to help them sleep or to help them and sedate them in those situations. It doesn't change the fact that they think the plane's going to crash.
No, I get
But that reduction in muscle tension then sends a signal that says there's nothing to worry about, because if there was something to worry about, your muscles wouldn't be all jelly-like. And for me, I got over my fear of flying by learning meditation.
Okay.
So what I did was again, I said, what are the factors that would increase my sort of my excitatory state? What are the activities that are going to make me sympathetically more sensitive? So alcohol the night before would always be, not that I drank every night, but I drank, so I wouldn't drink alcohol the night before I flew, because that would kill my deep sleep. That's a big part of my regulation of my autonomic nervous system. I wouldn't have caffeine on the morning as a flying. I would do low intensity, steady state cardiovascular exercise in the morning. So, a really light jog or bike ride.
For what reason?
To try and reduce my cortisol level. So cortisol will be higher in the morning. It's a cracking hormone. I produce it in the middle of the night. I want it to start coming down as I wake up, and it will come down with first morning light exposure plus some light exercise. That might also stabilize my blood glucose levels a little bit, which will make me less agitated. So exercise is always a modality of choice to move someone from, and again, is a heightened stress response anxiety. They certainly share lots of the same physiology. So that routine was great. Then I would put myself into a meditative state, and as I increase it, and takeoff was my thing. So if I got myself into a state where my breath work is under control, I used transcendental meditation, which is where you're using a mantra. So you've got a sort of two syllable Sanskrit word that you're recycling in your head. You keep going, oh, Gordon Bennett, the plane's taking off. Come back to the word, come back to the word. Gordon Bennett, the plane's going to explode. Come back to the word, come back to the word. So in that period, I managed to do what the tramadol or the beta blocker would have done, which is keep my physiology parasympathetically centric. And I then broke the connection that flying is scary. And now I fly with
So you've changed that. You've changed that into a new habit as well as managing the.
Totally.
So yeah.
So in many ways, you remove, and of course, I had a traumatic flight, so I had a trauma that was informing my future decisions.
Yeah.
And I was trying to, and if you look at cognitive behavioral therapy, you're trying to break the neurological chain between the way you feel and the memory of that. And again, I don't want to be an anecdotal person here going, this is how I saved myself. But I think that the evidence of using those medications to improve people's capability to cope with stress gives people who deal with lifestyle the power to replicate beta blockers and muscle relaxants.
Because the flying, the spider, all it is some kind of fear, which is creating an element of stress. And whatever it is, even being in a situation in the office where you have stress or an anxiety, or just life where people are stress and anxiety. I suppose what you kind of described there is, again, some form of light exercise, controlling alcohol, not having coffee, getting a good night's sleep. Like, you kind of gave a prescription of how to deal with a particular, a bigger category of stress or anxiety in some ways.
Totally, and a practical toolkit.
Right.
So it's not be less stressed, impossible. I've got 3 key layers I can intervene stress on. Change my environment, not fly. Do therapy, and EasyJet or other chains will do the fear of flying course, where they're trying to break that connection that you believe the plane's going to crash. So they educate you out of it, or you can do CBT, or you can do hypnotherapy. They're trying to break that chain that says, I'm taking what happened in the past and I'm turning it into a terrible future. So I've got, can I not fly? Can I change my psychology about the way I think about flying? Or can I change the way I react to my psychology? And again, if I change the way I react, I can change the way I think. So I think that's hugely powerful for people in the fitness and lifestyle profession, that we can play, for me, maybe the most significant role in stress management. Because people always think, if I think about stress, I've got to somehow understand psychology, or I've got to ask you questions about your marriage or your job, and questions I open questions that might take us down avenues I can't control. If I bring stress to the physiology of stress, and we know stress is physiological from the 1930s, where Hans Selye, this sort of wild Hungarian endocrinologist, stressed rats, and over time they all got stomach ulcers, their thyroid gland wasted, and their adrenal gland sort of blew up and got massive. So we knew that negative thoughts turned into physiology from the 30s,
Wow.
but we didn't start thinking about, well, how can I mitigate at a physiological level until recently. And for me, this sort of falls under the bracket of recovery. Off camera, we're talking about the definition of recovery, and I think it's very amorphous that people in the fitness profession think recovery is reduction of localized inflammation, because good products like Hyperice and others have created lots of recovery products. For me, recovery is biological processes that restore energy, and that will be reducing inflammation, but that will be supporting better sleep. That will be disabling sympathetic activated physiology and moving it into parasympathetic. That will be moving someone out of blood in their muscles to blood in their gut. But the biggest things that drive that are the actions we take, not necessarily the thoughts we have. And really, I want a behaviorally led approach that says, if I can embed an infrastructure that restores energy, that mitigates early excessive stress, then not only do I give you that energy to transpose into your physical domain, but you will think and feel better. And my professional experience has been countless episodes of that, where the research is catching up. I wouldn't be the best person to ask.
No, you mentioned you was at an event yesterday, a fitness industry event, and it got me asking, or got me thinking about the question and how you see it, which is clearly the way you're explaining, and it depends what you want to put, what label you want to put it, but health, fitness, well-being. I think we kind of know what we mean when we say those things.
Yes. But
I guess typically people think that they look at what's happened in the pandemic and they say, okay, look, we need to get more healthy. This is bad, and we've got to go and who do we go and see? Well, we probably need to go to the gym, or we need to go and see a personal trainer or something like that, because that logically is the next thing to do to solve it, or go and buy something, a Peloton or whatever online. But
yes,
I think the way that you seem to explain this is that that's one thing, but it's one of at least 4 or 5 things that we've just spent an hour talking about.
Spot on.
So let's talk about the industry, because you've been very involved in the fitness industry and for a number of years, and very connected with a lot of people in that space. Yeah. What do you think then, how do you think we're currently defining it, and how do you think we should define it if we're in the business of training, getting people fit and healthy?
So it's a good question. And I sort of left the fitness industry for a while. Now I'm back, and I love it.
Now you're back.
Welcome to an open house with legends. I love it. Actually, as a community, I love it. But I think fitness is obviously had to pivot with the digitalization and the hybrid models. It's been interesting, but it's not really evolved from a physiological point of view as I would see it. I think if I go one step back and say, look, you and I, how is it? It's difficult to define well-being. The standardized definition of well-being is a state of being healthy, comfortable, or happy. So it doesn't mean anything. That's why the biggest contributor to global well-being is skin creams, because they can claim it. I walked past a major shopping center the other day, and they had a new well-being section, and it was candles. I'm like, oh really? So candles are competing with me, competing with you, and the consumer's confused by this. But really, you and I, as we sit here now, our energy, and let's take that as a good marker of overall well-being, because that will transpose into performance, it will transpose into disease resilience, it will transpose into feelings of happiness. The factors affecting my energy will be the way I move, positively and negatively, the way I nourish and eat, positively and negatively affects my physiology, the way I recover, which includes sleep and stress management, positively and negatively affects my physiology, the way I think affects my positively and negatively, and the environment I find myself in. So across those 5 areas, my physiology is taking each day hundreds and thousands of triggers. Some reward me and nourish me, some punish me and I have to deal with them. And we can look at well-being as the net sum of whether all the positive inflections on my physiology outweigh the negative, plus minus whether I've been stitched up with some dodgy DNA by my parents, which I blame them for lots of things. So and the genetic contribution, like when I first started measuring full genome analysis, we thought genes were 60, 70, 80% of our health landscape. Now we're seeing that as more like 5 to 10%. Really? So really encouraging for the lifestyle professions that we own really the biggest factor that determines how well you live and how well you feel for how long, for how long
So
you
you
live.
can't blame your genes then for
You can't, but and there's
Totally.
genetic disease, so you're born with it, and there's genes which have a bigger contribution, but fundamentally, no, you've got to look at you lit the touch paper with your lifestyle, and some people have to work a lot harder.
You're responsible. You got to take
You're
that on your shoulder.
Yeah, and I believe that. Accountability is a crucial part of well-being. So if I look at the fitness profession, it covers movement pretty well. It got a bit obsessed with things that generated excessive calorie burn. We saw the HIIT, overtake sort of logical forms of exercise. There's not many people, over the age of 50 who can do 3 HIIT sessions a week and run a business and have a family and not break down. So I think the fitness profession hasn't had enough exposure to older, unfit, disengaged people. My life in health screening was people who aren't in gyms. If you're an average 25-year-old trainer, you've probably spent your life with 22 to 32-year-olds who love murdering themselves. That ain't the average. So I think movement, but let's work on the basis that they can control movement quality, activity, and training. They're pretty good with nutrition. They might be overtly into macros and micronutrients rather than, well, if I talk about 50% of my diet being hyperpalatable processed food, turn that to 40% and I'm flying, right? So a reduction in junk moves me closer to optimized nutrition. Don't send someone to a clinical nutritionist until you've cut out the nonsense that they're eating.
Basic stuff.
Basic stuff. So I think they're really strong in those 2 domains. They're probably nervous about mindset, understandably, but the area that they're not skilled in is recovery. And if we think of exercise is cellular damage. If I go and do weights, I'm overwhelming my musculoskeletal system on the hope that it rebuilds itself to a better level in 2 days' time because it didn't like what I gave it and it's trying to defend itself from the same threat in 2 days' time. If I go for a run and I overwhelm myself, my body's like, oh God, the well from which I must get water is now moved further away. I must increase my capillarization, my mitochondria to keep going to that well. So we are overwhelming physiology on the belief that it will rebuild itself bigger and stronger. But it only does that if there's sufficient recovery between those sessions. And you will know, we recover slower now than we did when we were full of stem cells and testosterone in our 20s. So activities that allow augmented recovery are critical. And in that, really, I'm talking about we need anyone who's wanting to improve their lifestyle to understand how they move, how they nourish, but how they recover. A core part of that is sleep. The other core part of that is stress management and autonomic nervous system regulation.
Do you think, just to jump in on that bit and keep where we were going, but do you think in a lot of cases that you almost like encourage, and I don't want to, I work with a lot of people that provide various different solutions here. So I'm not trying to sort of say, look, you're wrong, but do you think that when obviously the health club has got many competitors, they're competing with the hospitality industry, they're competing with apartment complexes, they're competing with corporate gyms, there's a lot of they're competing with digital solutions. There's a lot of people there, and we're all churning a lot of the same people in some respects. Yeah. So, but I appreciate the goal is, look, let's sell you a pack of sessions and let's kind of keep you coming back because that's great for business.
Yes.
Do you think that, I'm not saying that that's wrong because we're all in business, particularly at the moment, it's very difficult, but do you think that when we're looking at our products, it's like, okay, look, we still want you in 5 days, but we're almost telling you not to come in for 2 of those days to do a HIIT session because we kind of know that over the long term, you're not going to make it. And we're going to try and get you back in on those other few days to do something that's probably going to keep you coming back over the long term. Does that make
It makes entire sense. And I think the productizing of recovery is absolutely critical. One of the companies I'm clinical director for, Pillar Wellbeing, right. We have put recovery as an equal impetus as movement and nutrition. And we're saying, actually, we're embedding recovery into the protocols that every performance coach will use. We're embedding recovery into our behavior coaching. And we're saying, we are going to adequately coach you on recovery in the same way as we're going to guide you on eating and way we're going to guide you on movement. And I believe that is a model that needs to see some kind of application elsewhere. On a basic level, whether you commoditize it or not, it will make you a better trainer because you're understanding that you're a damage merchant, not, and the damage must be paid for. That's what we are. We're damage merchants in damage centers, and we're hoping that damage leads to progression. There's still a great challenge that the fitness industry is so poorly aware of its outcome markers. So, what percentage of your members got fitter? What do you mean by fitter? Well, Did their aerobic capacity go up? Did their musculoskeletal volume and capacity in terms of generating strength go up? Did their movement quality and injury predisposition go down? That's what we're doing,
don't know
isn't
that.
it?
Yeah. David Minton was telling me that. He says, like, we've got no output of what all of this fitness actually really does to be able. I think the conversation was in the middle of a pandemic where it's like, well, why are the government closing down gyms? Don't they realize how good they are? And he was like, we know that, but we do a pretty poor job at accurately explaining that, yeah, these people who do this are getting this. It doesn't really exist.
Totally. And and there's, you could overcomplicate that. I do enjoy the quantification of physiology to prove improvements, but you have to match it to subjective. So here's an energy questionnaire at the beginning, here's an energy questionnaire later. I believe the reason you got more energy is that these behaviors you've installed have changed your physiology that underpins that feeling. But we don't measure outcomes, and if we did, we'd have got into recovery much earlier, because we realized that we stagnate. And it's very, within periodization, of course, we recognize there must be some form of layoff. We know, Premiership footballers will take a closed season, and there needs to be this sort of recuperation, but it's been very poorly scientifically analyzed outside of elite sport, where, we see, again, Hyperices, we see Whoop, we see, First Beat, which is a Finnish heart rate variability company. These guys have had good traction in elite sport, because in elite sport, you understand recovery. Where was cryo first in elite sport? Where were ice baths have been in these elite sports for ages. Now they're becoming sort of commercialized and democratized, possibly inaccurately as well. I mean, if I go and hammer myself in a full body resistance session and then jump into an ice bath, haven't I just killed the inflammation that I tried to create?
Yeah, I was listening to Andrew Huberman about this, because I love ice baths. We've got one in the gym, but he was basically saying that if you do any kind of muscle training, the last thing you want to do is to go and do an ice bath afterwards. You probably want to do your ice bath in the morning, and then do maybe your sauna after you've done and this is the other thing, like, where do you find out about this kind of stuff?
And that is the challenge, and the fact that
so is that what you're doing in your sort of future practice then?
In future practice is trying to be, it's an education business that says, look, I think the biggest missing skill at present is the misunderstanding of the value and application of recovery, and the biggest feature within that is stress resilience. And so I created the practical stress resilience course with an unbelievable performance coach, Harry Jameson, who's someone who works extremely well in sort of the elite personal training world. But we worked together on Harley Street, and he became more of a holistic wellbeing professional, and saw that enabled him to get better results with his clients as he brought in breath work, as he brought in recovery, as he started to curate their sleep patterns. So he's a living example of what can happen if you take an exceptional fitness coach and turn them into a wellbeing professional. And between us, we said, look, we think if we add the ability to understand stress, to quantify it, to leverage heart rate variability, to leverage cortisol testing, if applicable, and in many cases doesn't need to be, but come to that, I'm going to improve the way you feel to improve the way you think, that supports just the core proposition of a basic gym, but it allows a gym that understands movement prescription and basic nutrition to pivot as a well-being proposition. And truthfully, a gym that doesn't understand or apply recovery cannot call itself a well-being offering, because it's no more than a candle. It's more than a candle, I'm being facetious. But it's missing the key piece. I had many clients over the years in the health management business where they trained their crackers off. They did enormous, they had food delivery, making sure their macros were controlled, and they controlled those two variables tightly, but they couldn't lose weight, or they had still lack of energy, etc. And when we brought in energy, more energy through recovery, i.e. reduce training intensity, manage caffeine, manage alcohol, manage breath work, manage hot, cold contrast therapy, manage pace of eating, manage a range of things that ultimately engaged more parasympathetic tone, we unlocked the opportunity they were looking for. So if I try and bully your physiology through 2 of those 5 domains, I won't get there. And the great thing we've got to look at in fitness and well-being is we don't improve someone's fitness and well-being by focusing on their strengths. We focus on their weaknesses. If I look at a biological quantification of myself, I say, look, I'm naturally genetically quite an okay aerobic athlete. I'm poor, musculoskeletal. If I look at my DNA, I'm not going to be, you can see by the breadth of my shoulders, I won't have huge muscle mass, and I'm poor in mobility. So my training should not be to make me a better aerobic athlete. And I remember I did a DNA test that looked at my physical capability, and I spoke to the lead, genetic scientist. He said, "Oh, you're you've got a good capability for being a good aerobic athlete. You should train that. I was like, but I need muscle, I need mobility. And what you're saying there is I should train my strength. No, I should train my weakness. Because well-being is not about performance. It's not taking one biological capability to extreme. It's making sure I have equitable capability across those key systems of biology. So my movement capability doesn't care that I'm an incredible runner. As soon as I move sideways trying to catch a tennis ball with my kids, I pull my groin. As soon as I
trying to get, are you saying then you want to get some kind of element of balance across all those key areas as opposed to kind of being too extreme on one?
Totally. And so, within the fitness domain, I've got to quantify the biological systems that deteriorate as I age. So aerobic, mobility, muscle mass and capability, they're on a diminishing curve. I've got to titrate my training against those. But if all three are great, then improving them isn't the reason. If they're all great, they're not the reason I've got low energy. So they're not the solution. And I think on social media messaging, we see a lot of people who are fixated on their survivor bias.
Yeah.
That they had a B12 injection in their butt and they went, their energy went through the roof. So they're on Instagram going, get your B12 here. They had low B12, so taking a limiting factor and hitting it up gave them unbelievable access to more energy. You take me with my high B12 and you inject my butt, I get a bruise.
That's the problem as well. Like that's the thing. Like so difficult to get over. Well, the power of social media now, like there are some people that have so much ability to communicate so much information and it doesn't necessarily relate to the credibility of that. In fact, a lot of people that are super credible are the ones that just have terrible influence on social media in most cases.
Terrible. The problem is nuance is everything, right? Context is everything.
Yeah.
So, there's very few recommendations you can unilaterally make that will benefit everyone to the same degree.
Exactly. But you don't, that message doesn't come over. I've been doing this thing with levels for quite a long time. I'm not saying you've seen that. And I've learned a hell of a lot. And I'm going to interview them. We've got something set up. But, I thought I knew a lot. I read a lot. I speak to hundreds of people. I have done. And I kind of thought, I know what I'm doing. Well, it wasn't until I did this, I realized how personal I was, my own sort of measurements compared to all the books and everything else, because I was looking at it instantly and I'm like, damn, this isn't what I thought it should be. Now after, I think I started in March or April. So we're now it's taken me all this time to start to control it. Because once I thought it was actually a scam. I'm like, this is stupid. Like, I can't be 50 or 60. Like, it's totally wrong.
Yeah.
And I was so annoyed I weren't going to use it again. But after months and months, I started testing lots of things. And I actually started to say, okay, this is what I need to do. And then when you sort of reverse that back out, it wasn't actually a bad... I could have rewritten a diet actually, and you could have looked at it and thought, well, that's a pretty sensible diet.
Yes.
So I had to kind of almost go full circle. But you're right. I did it just because I'm interested in it, and it's my business in some ways, and I don't have access to people like most people. But somehow we've got to get the message of, I suppose, one, you kind of need to speak to an expert in some way to get you started, and that expert also needs to have some kind of knowledge about this. And we was at Gymbox with Tom just this week, and he was saying the same thing. He says, look, that the information, the education isn't readily available for a lot of people, and I think the industry needs... There's a void there that needs kind of filling in some way.
There is, and that void, like all things, you want that sort of disruptive. I'm coming out of being in a sort of an elite medical institution and saying, really, what we're doing there is measuring the impact of poor lifestyle. Let's make better lifestyle management professionals. And I think not every gym instructor, personal trainer is going to want to be a lifestyle guide or a well-being coach. I think adding recovery to their core skills will make them better at what they're doing. But I think the opportunity to keep people in the profession, we see too many 35-year-olds dropping off the gym floor into regional management or boutique gym owner because there's not professional development. But
or the pay in some cases.
Or the pay, but let me tell you, the value you will add to a corporation or to a senior executive team by improving their energy capability, then you can transpose that to a different value.
Yeah.
So one of the great things we're seeing in future practice is once you understand recovery, stress, sleep, etc., and you've got your movement and nutrition, you actually become a corporate well-being professional.
Right.
Well, and the opportunity, we've seen people, going into large-scale organizations, running stress resilience talks, doing coaching to senior executive teams. That's what this course is about. I'm so tired of CPD. People educating with, adding a kettlebell course level 17 to their bio and the consumer not having a clue and the core product remaining the same. I'm saying I want to give you, in what is effectively 12 hours of CPD, a different vocational opportunity that will embed into what you do existing, your existing core work, but will give you the opportunity to sell your skills outside of a gym.
Yeah.
If I do any work into organizations now, I don't need dumbbells, I don't need any technology, because having a conversation about movement, nutrition, and stress and sleep, God, we can talk all day. And I'll find something in those 4 areas, and I put stress and sleep into one bracket, but I'll find something there that is holding you back. And if you're telling me at the beginning of that conversation you don't feel the way you want to feel, there's no way across movement, nutrition, stress, and sleep that I won't find something that will give you more energy.
No.
Now, I can't say that was the cause of your low energy. I'm not, but I can say if we improve that logically, there should be more for you to access. And I believe that skill should be in the toolkit of every trainer. And
why don't you think it's the sort of education doesn't recognize? Is it just a new thing, and a lot of this science is relatively new, and people are looking at things how you are? It's certainly, as I've put bits together, I'm starting to see how this forms. But why isn't the major? And maybe they are. Maybe I'm just ignorant to that. But how do you sort of see that people coming into this space and having at least an understanding of how it all fits together?
I think we go back to David Minton's point. If you don't measure effectiveness, then you don't know that you're ineffective. So I have to create the problem to sell the solution. That shouldn't be the case. People should be going, why have only? Of course, you got your retention, you got your community, your social. There's things that people have built really impressively to secure commercial quality out of a gym. But if we look at who got healthier, who got more well, you would be starkly disappointed by what the gym industry has done. So I see that, and fundamentally believe that the absence of understanding for the need for this is born out of a lack of understanding of what we're trying to achieve with lifestyle management. And it's rippling. But a company's going to say, well, that course is 347 quid. They're going to go, what's the product to sell at the end of it? And that's always an interesting question, because I'm not giving you a product, I'm giving you a philosophy. There are products within there. You can do a stress resilience consultation. It comes with a PowerPoint presentation to go and do organizational talks. I want those to be meaningful tools you take. But it's understanding this philosophy embeds into the DNA of your offering, not as something that goes on in a room out the back, like EMS training or a VO2 max test. It is, do you want to be a well-being operator? And if you do, you need to embed recovery, whether it's my course or someone else's. And I wrote a course that was, how can I come out of a very good degree? How can I have done the leading fitness qualification? How can I have worked in and around this sphere for 23 years and never seen standardized training in how we coach on sleep, how we coach on stress, how we coach on caffeine, how we coach on alcohol. And I said to you before we started this, if I go under a bus tomorrow, I know that probably the most impactful thing I've learned is documented and available. And that's a huge purpose behind Future Practice. Not that I'm an egotistical person. I just have a very unique professional experience being embedded in these strange clinical environments. And I've seen the living representation of lifestyle management. And I want everyone to be as passionate as I am about changing people's lifestyle, to change the way they feel, to change how long they live, and to change how well they live.
So my final question then, you did a Health Club Management article in 2016.
Oh, good research.
And I'm not going to take credit for that question, but we've got some good people who found it out. Like, how have we evolved since doing that article, would you say?
It's a great question. I think everyone had the opportunity for huge evolution. COVID, we all look back on it as an absolute monster of a challenge, and those who had facilities and were forced to pivot, etc., massive challenge. But we've got a heightened level of stress, we've got a heightened level of anxiety, and I think people have noticed that their facilities have become an absolute crutch to people in this period of time. The event I was speaking at yesterday was with Sandy, one of the founders of Barry's Bootcamp, and he was noting how it wasn't just that people were coming there to tear it up. It was an emotional outlet for them. Right. And I think within that, companies like that have trained their staff in mental health first aid and try to create some capability to help people with their struggling mental health. I think across the broader fitness profession, what's being delivered on the floor hasn't evolved. It's still sets and reps and periodization and macros and body composition. Even with body composition, if you don't measure, some form of body composition pre and post, how are we determining that's improving? So I'm amazed that from a quantification point of view, gyms can't always go, this is the fat mass we changed, or the visceral fat, or the whatever it might be. I think I think people are recognizing their members don't feel very well, and that this is a crucial part of that. They recognize that the community is adding value. They recognize that the human interaction is adding value, the movement's adding value. But I think the proposition that they're offering to their members hasn't evolved in any way meaningfully. Putting it into my lounge but delivering the same thing is not a markedly evolved product. It's intelligent business strategy, and credit to everyone who, God knows how they did it in many cases, turned bricks and mortar into digital and slick digital. But what the end user's receiving, both culturally, technically, from a lifestyle prescription point of view, hasn't moved on. And if it has moved on, it's because companies have bought products that talk about well-being, not services. So I can have a great gym and have hyper ice in the corner. I can have some kind of breath work jewelry over here. I can have kombucha in the
candles of kombucha.
Yeah, okay, kombucha, and I can go, I'm a well-being club. But you're not, putting all the ingredients in a kitchen doesn't make you a chef, right? And people picking at those things randomly without any understanding of how it applies to them, whether it's their limiting factor or not, where it sits in the ecosystem. God, taking kombucha compared to chewing your food it's unequivocal. Taking kombucha compared to diversifying your diet to 30 different types of food, unequivocal. And of course, people want passive solutions versus active solutions, but we don't change physiology passively. We really don't. We can support habits and behaviors with technology, but technology will never override the sum of the micro, delivered consistently, regularly, again and again. So yeah, I used Hyperice to manage my inflammation, but it's about that won't work as effectively as me stretching and dedicating time to that mobility. It augments it. It doesn't do it on its own. Right. So I think adding recovery or well-being technology to a space that's culturally the same. By cultural, I mean it's the same people dressed in the same clothing with the same mirrors with the same music. It's a completely disengaging environment to the non-gym population, and technically those staff have got no skills in the things that they're talking about, unless they might have watched Huberman Labs or listened to your podcast and picked up some snippets. So we have this disparate technical knowledge in well-being that is a wild west, with products telling us that these products will be our salvation, and there's no consistency in that industry whatsoever. So I see opportunity, but I see risk. If we don't move quickly, and I say we as the fitness industry, it would only be a product marketplace, well-being. And it should be a service marketplace, not a product marketplace. And I believe wholeheartedly that someone who's already skilled in movement prescription, who's already skilled in nutritional coaching, is, with the addition of recovery, a genuine well-being opportunity. And it's not that complicated. That's the key to it. It just requires understanding of scope of practice, understanding of the key interventions that affect autonomic regulation and where that plays into psychology. It's not that complicated. But no one has sort of taken the time to try and give that skill consistently.
Great. Well, I had a lot of questions about corporate wellness, and we're going to have to save that for another day. But thank you very much for coming in, Oliver.
Absolute pleasure. I
will be back, and we'll do a part 2.
Thanks for having me. Great.
Thank you very much.
Really
Appreciate it.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.